Hello, I'm Robert Rickover, an Alexander Technique teacher in Omaha, Nebraska. And my guest today is Imogen Ragone, an Alexander Technique teacher in Wilmington, Delaware. And we're going to talk about some unexpected paths her teaching has led her to, specifically dealing a lot with trauma and chronic stress, working online with groups, an interest in nervous system regulation and co-regulation, and also her collaboration with a psychotherapist and an ongoing study group um, that she runs, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
And, so Imogen, welcome.
Yes, thank
And,
you. Thank
and I think it might be good if you could just briefly tell our viewers and listeners how you arrived at the Alexander Technique and a little bit about your earlier experiences before taking these going on these unexpected paths that I just mentioned.
Sure. Um, well, I guess it's probably almost 25 years ago now. I was just having tons of neck, shoulder pain, and medicine was not helping. I mean, it helped a bit, but it wasn't solving anything. And my mother in England, who was a musician, had heard of the Alexander Technique and had experienced it herself, also for neck issues, interestingly. So patterns run in families. But
Mhm.
yes, so I found a teacher in Richmond, Virginia, which is where I lived.
Mhm.
Immediately felt like, oh, such a relief that there was something I could actually learn myself
Mhm.
to change patterns. That just felt so empowering,
Mhm.
um, and led me to train, which I have to say at that time was all about me wanting more.
Mhm.
Um, for me, if I was immersed in a training, then I'm getting more and more Alexander Technique for me, and that I will have a career in which the the important thing is that I take care of me while I'm doing it rather than me doing that where it's not important,
Yeah.
directly to the job. Um,
We should probably just clarify the training you're talking about is Alexander teacher,
yeah, Alexander teacher training.
which is
Yeah.
usually something like a 3-year course.
And that's exactly
Yeah.
what I had a 3-year course with Daria Okagawa. It was a wonderful, wonderful time for me. I really felt um, I don't know. I think it's really getting to learn about yourself in such a deeper way that was unexpected too. I just wanted initially more relief from pain, basically.
Right.
But
Right.
it offers so much more. It was a wonderful time. And then immediately after my 3 years were up and I graduated, we moved that summer to Wilmington, Delaware. So even I'd had a few practice students in the last year of my training. That was kind of part of how it worked, and of course I had all my fellow trainees and the teachers, and so I was like ripped away from all of that and had to kind of totally set up on my own. um, um, did contact some Alexander teachers in the area, which was helpful. There's not that many in Wilmington, but there's quite a few in the greater Philadelphia area, which eventually I became more involved with.
Mhm.
We do an online summit every year.
Yes,
Anybody who wants to know about
absolutely.
that?
Highly recommended.
Yes.
Yeah.
Um, uh, yeah, so I was kind of really thrown into kind of just figuring this out on my own. And two of the things that I did in the first year of being here that I think really kind of set me on a path was, one, I had time and I learned how to um, do HTML code so I could build my own website. I realized that I needed a web presence. This was in 2006-07 when I was first setting up. And I had time to learn how to do it myself so I could be in control of it myself. It seems to be a bit of a theme. I like to be able to do things myself. So web, and also I got a gig at our local YMCA teaching a weekly class there, weekly 1 hour class. And people would sign up. They have like so many sessions a year and they'd have so many classes with me. And they got that as part of their membership. I didn't get paid very much, but my goodness, I learned so much. My training had been quite traditional, very eclectic, because Daria is an actor by training and we had acting games and things were all part of it. But the kind of hands-on work part of that training was very much more Carrington style, which is her lineage, which I loved, but it doesn't translate maybe so well into teaching a group class. Some of the acting stuff that Daria did with us was helpful.
Right.
But so that is, so you can kind of see that those two little strands with seeing the importance of a web presence, and then kind of got on social media as well later on. Met you through that kind of web association. Going to Alexander conferences, AMSAT conferences was for me at that time, and really found that I liked groups. They were challenging for me at first, and some of the things I did that didn't work, I kind of in the beginning, but it was super learning. But it helps you really realize that how you've got to have more clarity with your words, because you can't rely on hands-on. And what comes from other people observing and other people's questions that come up that then help everyone in the group. Yeah. Anyway, that's kind of how it all started. But I would say I was still very much focused on kind of helping people with pain and movement complaints, and more in that realm was my focus, because that's what I kind of come from myself.
Right. And your experience with groups echoes actually F. Matthias's experience at one point when he was asked to give series of classes to some theology students in I think Melbourne area. And he said to the headmaster, "I've never done this before, but I'm willing to give it a shot." And he then says he was very glad he did. And he said a little bit about how he proceeded to do it. And we have exactly the same thing with Marjorie Barstow, who was sort of the group queen, you might say, for years. Same thing. Someone invites her down to school in Texas to teach a group of people, which he had never done before. And in her typical way, she said, "Well, I'll just give it a gambling chance." And out of that came years and years of working with groups. So you're in a good lineage there.
Thank you. And I should just say, it wasn't that we did nothing about teaching in groups in my training. We actually did do a little bit, and also observed Daria teaching groups. And of course, we were in a group teaching situation.
Exactly.
But the very dominant part of the training was learning kind of hands-on Alexander technique, one-to-one work. Yeah.
So after all this, sometime, and I can't remember when, I noticed that you had moved off in a somewhat different direction. Maybe
not
years ago, but a while ago.
Yeah, so I think a few things kind of happened. So one was the getting more into group teaching. Um, the other was getting more and more interested in the thinking, the what you might call the mindfulness aspect of the technique.
Mhm.
Um, and helping engage my students in doing the thinking for themselves, which was always important to me, but it became much, much more. Um, and a moment when I dared to venture into the world of online teaching, I think was kind of pivotal too. I had a very good friend in the UK who was willing to be my guinea pig, and we didn't know what would happen. And uh, we worked together over several weeks and months, and probably actually over a year or two eventually. Um, and I was just trying things out with her and seeing what we could do, and being very much in this experimental mode, and we'll see what happens. I didn't know. But when I went back over and I got to work with her in person, it was absolutely not like working with a beginner.
Right.
And so that convinced me that it was worthwhile. And you were influential, and me, you, and another teacher, Jennifer Roy Prankoli, experimented
Mhm.
together, playing around online,
Yep.
on Skype probably at the time, not even Zoom. Um,
Yeah, right.
um, um,
Prehistoric times, yes.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. And getting more ideas of how to work that way. And then a big point in my kind of development is that I was at the International Alexander Technique Congress in Limerick, and I think that was 2015.
Mhm.
I went to a uh, continuing learning, continuous learning, I think they call it,
Mhm.
session with Mio Morales, and
Mhm.
got introduced to his way of working, which he calls Primal Alexander now. And he very much is hands off. It's kind of a principle
Right.
now, I think, with him. But really teaches systematic ways to um, um, help people engage, learn how to do constructive thinking or directing, whatever word you want to use for that.
Mhm.
And he has many, many practices, or etudes as he calls them, starting with the basic one, which he calls the cycle, which is, I do it in a somewhat different way now, different words, but it's a key part of my teaching, and it gives students a simple way to practice
Mhm.
thinking in a new way on their own. So I worked with him online, and for a few years after the Congress, once he started doing that. And I've kind of run with some aspects of his work in my own work. Let's
Right.
put it like
Right.
that.
Right.
Mm.
Right. And then you kind of moved into the trauma and stress and nervous system regulation
Yeah,
area.
yeah. So this was a totally sus surprising and unexpected direction for me. What I had been in the stress part, not so much. I had got very interested in stress, and particularly in working with women. And for a while, it was really kind of women in the workplace, women in business. Um, and you can see how stress might be part of that. Um, but a couple of students came my way, one in particular who was dealing with complex trauma
Mhm.
and found my work supremely helpful,
Sure. Yeah.
to her.
Mhm.
Um, and she has really delved into the neuroscience of of trauma and our neurobiology, and she would keep making these connections. Oh, when we do that, that's because this is happening in the nervous system, and da, 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 da. And I found it very exciting, and of course, to see someone helped in that way. And in fact, over the last, I think it's 3 years now, nearly, we've been collaborating. She's still a student of mine at times, but she's also a colleague now, and we teach an online course together that's particularly for people who are dealing with trauma and chronic stress.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll be doing the what you might call the Alexander part, you know, and she'll bring in the information about the nervous system and the neuroscience part in a simple, accessible ways. But we've really found that when you understand the neurobiology in a simple way, it's very kind of unshaming, and there can be a lot of shame that people feel about the responses and patterns that they've got into, and it's when you really understand what's going on. Well, of course I was tense then. It's because my nervous system was in fight or flight, and have tools to help you get out of it. Anyway, it's been a very, very rich collaboration, and a totally unexpected path.
Mm-hmm. And I think you've made the point that working with people in groups online has some advantages, in particular for that group of people. Could you elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, I mean, every individual is different, and there could be a reason why very quiet hands-on work could be a calming and helpful way to work with someone who's dealing with trauma.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
However, hands-on for many trauma survivors, touch can be a very triggering and unsafe thing.
Yeah.
Because of past experiences, right? And so it's not going to help them. It's not going to help improve their use, to use Alexander jargon. It's actually going to freak them out.
Yeah.
So that's one reason why the online setting, it also helps with that safety, that they can feel more autonomous. There's nothing suddenly going to be sprung on them in the room, or and having an actual group there of people who've been through different things. And I don't want to suggest everyone that I work with has had horrendous trauma, although there are a few. It's pretty horrendous, but the chronic stresses of life can wear you down, and anything that helps you calm your nervous system, anything that helps you deal with trauma, will help you deal with the normal stresses of life too. So, but that group, there's another added aspect, is that when, for instance, we do, I call it a practice, and I think that word works better with the people I'm working in an etude. But when we do a practice together, like the cycle, and there are quite a few others, some of which I've got from Mio, and some which I've created myself, and even ones that some of my students have created. But when we're all doing it together in the group, and you can see everyone, we're all getting that non-verbal information from each other, and the co-regulation that happens between people is amplified in a very beneficial and positive way. So that's one aspect of why the group can be especially helpful.
And I believe that you have an ongoing study group. Is that also people coming because
Yeah,
of trauma, or is it more general?
it is the trauma, chronic stress, people. They're mainly people who've come through the 6 week course that I teach.
Mhm.
One or two who've been private students, and it's been a good fit for them. Um, and it's small but growing. I think we've got 14 or 15 people at the moment.
Right,
But we started with three. So
right,
um,
right.
yeah.
So,
Mhm.
and that's a group that meets every week at a fixed time, basically.
Yeah, we've actually now got 2 time slots a week, and you can come to both or come to one. Most people have a preferred, time that
Right,
works better for them, but a few dedicated people come to both classes.
right,
Yeah.
right.
And
And-
that in itself is that they're getting that, you get that feeling of community support too. And it's again a bit of a combination between we'll talk about some of the um, neuroscience or that sounds like it's very academic. It's not at all academic. It's we're talking about it in layman's terms.
sure.
And Shay, my collaborator, is part of these groups too, so she can kind of bring in that, you know um it's just a very supportive environment, and it creates an environment where people can learn because they feel safe and seen and heard. That's another thing that's important to, I think it's important to all human beings, but especially for trauma survivors. Yeah.
Right. And probably we should mention that another area I won't say specialized in, but are quite active in is the whole question of constructive rest, which
Mm-hmm.
is a pretty standard Alexander thing, but
Mm-hmm.
you have over the years created quite a large number of constructive rest talk throughs. And
Yeah.
I got reminded of them a couple of weeks ago because I have a student who listened to one of yours and just went on and on about how wonderful it was. And then the next
Well,
one
what do you
with her,
expect, Robert?
she continued in that vein. But just to say what you've been up to in that area, you mentioned the Philadelphia group that
Mhm.
maybe, I don't know, 8 or 9 teachers in the Philadelphia area that put
Um,
together. Is it something like that number?
we've got about over 20 people in the
Oh,
group, but
that
not
may
everyone, not every single person might have been involved, but it's quite a substantial number of us
and,
are.
and
Yeah.
is it
Mm.
every year that you, or is it every
Yes.
year?
So uh, I want to come back to constructive rest, but we started this online Alexander Techniques Summit, as we called it, in the fall of 2020. So when pretty much everything had to be online, and I think people were, in some ways, desperate for
Mhm.
that kind of connection to the work, and we wanted to bring it to beginners.
Mm.
And so we started it then to tie in what was then International Alexander Technique Awareness Week, which seems to have completely disappeared, or it's at a totally different time of year now, or something changed. Um,
Right.
but it was very well received, and we had people who knew nothing about the technique, and we had teachers of many, many, many years standing who also enjoyed it. And each day, as well as some of the sessions that different teachers taught, we each day we'd have a constructive rest taught by a different teacher, and that's remained a feature of the summit, which now takes place in January, and it will be in January 2025. ties in with the date of FM's birthday. And
Perfect.
it seems now that, you know, the lockdowns and everything is over and people are out and about, January seems a much better time to have an online event like that.
That's
Yeah,
good. And I
yeah.
just put a little plug in for that. It's an amazing resource for anybody who wants to learn something about the Alexander technique and maybe doesn't have access to a teacher or just wants to explore it at no cost, right?
Yeah, and no cost, you get a
No
few
cost.
ideas, you know,
It's an
you know,
incredible resource. And as you say, every day there's someone who has their own constructive rest approach to a talk through. And
mhm,
many of those they were all recorded, and many of them are now available on my podcast site. A huge number of them now, almost more than I can handle, but they're all there. And in addition, um, you, I think, have constructive rest talk throughs every week or
you know, every month. So
every
I
month.
have to
Okay.
say, right from the very beginning of me being a student of the Alexander technique, pre-training, constructive rest felt like the thing I could do. I might not have understood everything that happened in my lesson. I might not be able to remember to think it through, but I could do constructive rest, and I immediately found that super helpful. And it continues to be a daily practice for me. And so that was the best part of my YMCA classes right at the beginning. I would do an Alexander Lyde, you know, a constructive rest talk through. I knew I could do that part well. I would supplement it with a little bit of hands-on work, kind of going around the people in the group, but mainly they were getting my words and they were, you know, lying down and enjoying it. And everyone liked that part of the class probably best.
Yeah.
um,
Well, it's
um,
like the
and
corpse pose in yoga.
yeah. Is that your
That was the
favorite one?
one yoga thing I could do really well and enjoyed.
Yeah.
Not the other
Um,
stuff so much.
and
Yeah.
so one of the things I did, oh, several, probably over 10 years ago now, is I really wanted to encourage people to do it every day because it felt like people like it, but they forget or they get unmotivated or they kind of don't know what to do with their whatever. And I created the 30-day constructive rest challenge, which you can still sign up for.
Right. And again,
Which
that's free, right? No,
it's free. It's basically you get an email every. Basically, I just wanted to email and say do constructive rest, but I had to make it a little bit more inviting than
right,
that. So
right.
I give a little thought for the day, which you could say is a direction or a potential constructive thought, um, and a resource. So it might be one of these a free resource. So it might be one of these podcasts on body learning. It might be a blog post I did about it. It might be someone else's. It's not just all my stuff. It's things that Alexander teachers offer for free about constructive rest. Yeah, so constructive rest has been a bit of a through line. For some trauma survivors, it's not a good fit, or
Oh, how's that?
because lying down for 20 minutes. Um, it's like a little too much of a good thing is triggering. I mean, and they might have associations to do with lying down and being aware of things.
Mhm.
Whereas, you know, the little drops, it's like a constructive thought here, a little bit of awareness here, a little bit of it helps it be more manageable. There are some that absolutely love it, but for most people who are experiencing stress, chronic stress, constructive rest is a brilliant uh, practice and tool and resource to have. and you don't need any background Alexander technique knowledge, I
Right.
don't think,
I
to
think that's
benefit.
one of the really powerful things about it, that anyone can benefit, anyone except perhaps those people you just talked about, but pretty much anyone else can benefit from constructive rest, and they need not have had any Alexander teaching. They can do it. They can do it. No, they can
Yeah,
just
and
do it. And
occasionally
yeah.
people have physical things going on, which makes it difficult to lie down in the typical prescribed way.
Oh yeah,
And
you may
I
have to
think you can
modify it.
benefit, you can just modify it to what's comfortable to you, or even sitting, in a supported way.
Mhm.
Especially if you have a little bit of guidance for your awareness. So I
Right.
created an audio which you can buy very inexpensively on my site a long time ago. I would like to do an update sometime. But again, since it's happened sometime in the last 3 years, I've been offering a monthly half-hour Zoom session.
Mhm.
And there does seem to be something extra that you get when you're doing it in community with other people, even online.
Mhm.
I can't explain it except that it's probably something to do with that co-regulation that
Mhm.
happens. Even
Right.
if you're not even, when you're doing constructive rest, you're not looking at the screen.
Um,
But
Definitely
there's
not.
still something extra that happens with that. But anyway, I've actually got quite an archive of those talks too, um, which if I got organized, I could probably
Right.
sell. But anyone who signs up for the constructive rest gets that recording afterwards.
Is there anything else you want to mention about the work you're doing these days?
Maybe you just alluded it to in the beginning, is that I have also collaborated sometimes with a good friend of mine who's a psychotherapist,
Oh, right.
Miriam
Yeah.
Grace. She's in the UK. We haven't done anything for a couple of years, but we're um, cooking up something for next year. But again, this kind of didn't really come out of me working with people dealing with trauma, but my goodness, it so ties in, the work that she does. And she's Gestalt therapy is her
Mhm.
main
Mhm.
um, background. So again, another strand of uh, of how my work has gone in this unexpected way. Although when I look back, my response to my first lesson was that feeling of feeling more empowered. It was something that I could do myself, that I had more agency over. Because when you're in chronic pain, I felt very disempowered, and like the pills weren't
Mhm.
working, and the chiropractic had stopped being effective, and things.
Right. Right.
If it and that is, when I look back, a through line to the work I'm doing now, because helping people have that sense of agency is hugely important. If you're feeling, traumatized, if you've been traumatized, um, because that's what you've lost in
Right.
part.
And people who are in chronic pain, whether it's emotional pain or just
That's
pain from a
traumatic
car
in
accident
itself,
or
actually.
whatever,
Yeah.
um, those are the very people who may find it a little challenging to use Alexander directions, because they do require mobilizing your thinking process. And
Mm,
for people that are in a lot of pain, that's not an easy thing to do.
mm-mm,
So something that you could even see as a bridge to perhaps later more traditional online or in-person teaching, uh, constructive rest, those talk throughs, that's the kind of thing that they can probably do.
Yeah, because especially in that setting, you can just receive it and you don't have to do anything
or
or engage
thinking, or
or think
thinking.
anything.
Right.
You know, you can just receive the session. And in fact, I started the online constructive rest sessions in December. I think it'll be 3 years ago this December,
Mhm.
because I wanted to offer something. And, you know, the holiday season is people don't have much time. They don't to engage with a new class, but maybe they want to receive something that can help lower their stress for half an hour before. And it seemed to be a hit, and that's why I've kept on with it. So.
Right. And constructive rest could start with someone not doing any thinking, just being there. But once they've gotten comfortable with it, and they may begin to be able to mobilize their thinking, and it's a perfect venue to explore Alexander Technique directions as well.
Absolutely.
So it's a
Yeah.
remarkably powerful in many ways process that
Mm.
uh it's really a very, very powerful
Hmm.
process on many
Yeah.
levels, I would say.
Yeah. And I
So
have to say, my sessions, that yes, you can just receive them,
mhm,
and there's loads. You get loads of ideas for ways to things to explore, or constructive thinking directions to
mhm,
play with,
mhm.
you know, on your own, whether in constructive rest or doing anything. So, um, while they're not a lesson, you are learning.
Definitely are learning. Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
is there anything else you want to say about what's going on with your work these days, or?
I don't think so, but anyone who is curious to know a bit more, you can always check out my website. So that's
Yeah, I'll put a link to your
imogenragone.com.
site
Yeah.
there, and anyone who's interested anywhere in the world can contact you
Yeah.
and join your
Yeah.
sessions or
Yeah, or check out, actually have a nice, somewhat lively Facebook group, the Body Intelligence Community,
yeah,
and
join that.
that can be also a little way to kind of get introduced to some of the ideas I work with. I do a little, what I call a power pause there, a little guided 2 or 3 minute talk every Thursday. So that would give you a little taste too. So.
All right. Well, I think this would be a good time to bring the conversation to an end. My guest has been Imogen Ragone, and she teaches in Wilmington, Delaware, but she's available wherever in the world you are, and provide information about how to get in touch with her. Thank you, Imogen, for
Well,
being on
thank
the
you.
show.
Yeah, thank you very much.